Dārcegērtnē mēģināja sūtīt uz Lēveni, būdams vēl ķelnēm, nevarēja atrast, kur Lēveni ir tajā dzelzceļa sarakstā. Izrādās, ka vāciski tas ir Lüdišs, un tad nevarēja. I'm just telling some my memoirs on how we started the cooperation with your distinguished university in early 90s when one of our botanists exploring the development of rhododendrons went to Leuven, and we both wanted to find the way to Leuven from Cologne and didn't recognize it in German. It's Leuven is Lüttich. So it took us like the time to find out where to go and how to proceed. But since then, numerous students from our university have enjoyed the possibility to work and to study in Leuven. Various fields, starting from theology and philosophy and with science and physics and space research. And it was our real pleasure to sign this memorandum of cooperation today in our small aula. And in future, of course, we are looking forward to even more intense cooperation and also to welcoming the students and researchers and scientists from Leuven to Riga, because most of our universities are science-oriented, although our history goes back only some 100 years, and Leuven counts its history from the 15th century, and it is the largest university in Benelux countries with more than 50,000 students. And the university is ranked, according to all systems, among the first 100 universities in the world. We are also among the first 100,000. Nevertheless, we are going ahead and looking to nice development, especially because of various cooperations we are establishing, and especially the cooperations which have so lasting history and so good basis on it. Professor Rik Torfs is the rector of the university since 2013. Apparently they have a similar system as our university in electing rector, because it takes some casting the votes and it takes some rounds of elections and so on and so on. But Professor Torfs is not only the academician, he is also well known in politics. He's been in the local government representing, he's been on media, running both for university and for political decisions. His research background starts from his own university. Professor Torfs was graduated at Leuven University in law, and his specific field is canonic law, so the church and the law, which of course is a very interesting point also for us, because in a few days we are also welcoming the visit of a very high official state secretary of Polish Church, where probably also those aspects will come in, actually also for our university, how our relationship to the church, our relationship to the academic development and theology, how they can be put together. And although the University of Leuven is called Catholic University, the field which they are covering is very broad, and because of also the activity of Professor Torfs, it is widening. Professor Torfs is a guest professor, has been guest professor and honorary member of many neighboring universities, neighboring countries, and we are very proud that many members of University of Leuven have been here to the University of the previous year we had the possibility to award the honorary doctorate to Professor De Pape from the Faculty of Education of Lēvenes University. And so today Professor Torfs will address not his research field, his specialization, but most widely the topics of the development of the universities and how the universities, being the subjects of the development, at the same time are shaping this development of the universities of future and the future of the universities. The floor is yours, Professor. Thank you. Please to welcome Rik.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, for this very, very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. It was also a pleasure of having had the ceremony this morning with a few ministers. That's always beautiful for the decorum and gives some value to what we are doing. So thanks a lot for being here also, to come freely to this place on a beautiful spring day. That requires some courage. Thank you all for being here. My topic is the University of the Future. So that means already that I suppose that universities have some future. And I think they have. But then the question is, how are those things going to develop? What should universities do to become or to remain strong? Because let's not forget, they are, let's say, the witnesses also of our past. Very often they are older than the countries they are operating in. So they remind us of the past, they also lead to the future. My central idea, and I will develop that further then when it comes to the different aspects of university education, but my central idea is that the university should try to be or to remain elusive. It should be operational in various fields, it should be many things, and not focus on just one topic of fashion. It should take into account all its elements together and not go in one or another direction. For instance, if a university is just focusing on teaching, even on excellent or brilliant teaching, well, what's the difference then with a school? School teachers also try to do their best. And sometimes they are really quite convincing in what they say, pedagogically tremendously strong. So a university is, of course, more than a school, more than just teaching. But of course, it's also more than just research. And that's maybe something we also have to take into account because, and rightly, around the turn of the century, many people were focusing in universities quite a lot on scientific research. Perfect. But it's not the only thing. Research, yes, but that should also entail some high-quality teaching based on research. Otherwise, if that teaching is only second-hand and something for people who are not gifted enough to be good researchers, otherwise, universities become institutions of research with some classes also offered. And that's not enough. A third element is valorization as a service to society. And then I'm thinking of spin-off activities, small companies being a result of scientific research. And of course, they are very important. But if a university is focusing almost exclusively on valorization, then it becomes a company and a company that will always be too small to compete with true, merciless multinationals. So what I mean and what my central idea is, university should not focus on fashion, but on what it truly is, a combination of three elements: education, research, and service to society. And they should be in some balance. Of course, as scholars, we shouldn't be too balanced. Some madness remains even required. All people working at the university are a little bit strange, peculiar, but fortunately, they are all in a different way. But that's my starting point. Let's look to tradition, and not so much to fashion. And tradition as such, and that's a general idea, is something that gives you the courage to do good things in the future. Because if you are an old university, then you can be sure that you made a lot of mistakes. Our university was founded in 1425. Most professors of that age are not very active anymore today. They all retired, I suppose. But we had a very, very long history, including some mistakes. We were more or less the first place to condemn Luther. Should we have done that? Well, probably not, but we did, and we are still there. And that gives a good impression. You can make horrible mistakes, like condemning Luther, and notwithstanding that, staying alive. Many things are relative. The errors strengthen our identity and give us the courage to be really audacious when it comes to the future. So that's my first point. Elusiveness should be the key value of any university. Elusiveness, so that multinationals or governments or other nice institutions never can lay their hand on what a university is. We should remain a little bit nice, necessary, but at the same time slightly difficult partner to anybody. So that's the starting point. And now I will develop the key elements of the university, namely the teaching of the future, the research of the future, and ultimately also the service to society of the future. Let's start with the teaching. Of course, it seems obvious, teaching. Well, you have to teach interesting things. You have to transmit scientific results to your students. And that's not untrue. But it's probably not enough. Just spreading knowledge, well, everybody can do that. The internet, for instance, there is a lot of information on it. Admittedly, also erroneous information. That's absolutely true. But then, with some keen mind, you are able to unravel all those things and to come to the ultimate truth, between brackets, even by consulting things that are on internet. And clearly, that transmission of knowledge, I think, is not enough. Of course, it remains indispensable. University alumni have to be skillful craftsmen. Let's take the example of a dentist. Well, a dentist should be able to identify the correct teeth and work on them and not on other teeth or on other parts of the human body. That's obvious. That's life. These things are skills. And of course, a mathematician has to be a real mathematician. An economist has to be a real economist, which means that he can defend all kinds of positions, even the opposite ones, in a credible way. So you have all those skills being developed. But at the same time, I think a university has another task, and that is the development of the person as such. As it is called in our university, in our current education plan, the disciplinary future self. Who are people going to become as human beings? That's equally important, and that's something you don't learn on internet, nor in the kitchen of your mother while consulting all kinds of web pages. For that, you truly need a university. It comes close, that idea, to the ideal of Bildung in the past in Germany, but that looks a bit old-fashioned. And let's maybe try to identify some elements of that formation, education of the person. One element certainly is the idea of being able to assess oneself and one's own position. How strong am I and how weak? It's very difficult. Most men, for instance, overestimate themselves, while most women underestimate themselves. That's a tradition. Fortunately, it exists for us, otherwise we would be outruled immediately. But we should be able to know that and to assess that ourselves. Self-knowledge. Look in the mirror and don't curtail your own ideas to mere admiration. So that's a first element, knowing yourself. But also being strong is important, becoming resistant. Also learning to be successfully unsuccessful. Because a lot of things can happen in life that are maybe not nice and not expected. One can become sick, one can lose a partner or lose a job. And not always due to internal, but sometimes also due to external circumstances. There can be some bad luck in private life. Divorce, for instance. Although one should ask the question, after the 4th divorce, whether it's only bad luck. That's also part of life. The capacity to see your part in the picture and the part of others. Another element is the possibility to change. Our students should be open to change, but not in a dogmatic way, as HR managers tend to speak about it. But change means that sometimes in life, new opportunities do emerge. And sometimes you do feel in your own life, now something should be done. I have to choose for another road, another track. And also feeling that before others tell you that your game is over is a capacity that universities have to teach to their students. You could call it Bildung, certainly, but you can also go back further in history to one of our famous former professors, Erasmus, who also was in Leuven 500 years ago, who was a brilliant man with a mind full of irony, and he had, for the education of children and students, 3 capacities that he absolutely wanted to focus on. And those capacities were erudition, wisdom, and piety. Strange words. But what do they mean? Well, the interesting thing is that they can mean a lot. They meant a lot in the days of Erasmus, and they also do so today. The 3 words all have a kind of open content, a content open for debate, a very rich content, hiding various intellectual options behind an apparent neutral notion. First of all, what's erudition? Who knows? It's highly debatable. Some people would say erudition today means that you have a keen knowledge, sometimes even a limited one, of all possible sciences. You should have a good look to the Mendeleev statistics or the ideas of Einstein, and at the same time you should know something about literature. Then erudition becomes a catalogue of useful knowledge. It makes me think a little bit of what happened in the United States several decades ago. You had handbooks for women with a summary of the masterpieces of Western literature on one page, so that during receptions they could enter into learned conversation with brilliant men, engineers for instance, who who of course had read all those novels. You see, that's a kind of useful knowledge, but is that true erudition? Maybe true erudition is a little bit more focusing on humanities, on the depth of life, the soul of human beings, and maybe it's also learning people to look better, to see that very often the detail is the synthesis. Sometimes a photographer can make an image of a situation which says more about it than a book of 200 pages. Well, that's also erudition, having the necessary culture to grasp in one image, let's say, the destiny of mankind, to exaggerate slightly. So erudition, what does it mean? Going in depth or knowing a little bit of everything? Erasmus was already dealing with that. We can debate on it. We are not agreeing upon it very often. Personally, I have a small, how would I say, preference for the depth of things, but I'm also very open to the rest. Wisdom, that was the second word in the ideas of Erasmus. And what is wisdom? It's a dangerous word. I know a lot of people who say, finally, I acquired some wisdom in life. Very often when they are already rather old. And sometimes wisdom is no true wisdom, but another word for resignation. Wisdom as resignation. People not having the courage anymore to be very lively in their ideas. No risks anymore in life. A little bit of irony coming close to cynicism. So wisdom is a dangerous notion. It does exist, I presume. I know even a few wise people in my life, not too many. Most of them passed away slightly after having become truly wise. But it remains, of course, a hazardous term. I think true wisdom can be found in what the economist Schumpeter of Czech-American origin once said, that true civilization is working hard in a limitless way for something that you know to be relative. Then you have the two elements. You have the wisdom of the analysis and the courage of the action. That's something we should try to learn at universities. And then finally there is piety, and of course being pious was important for people like Erasmus or Thomas More, but maybe is not to the same extent relevant today. Pious people are seen by our society as people trying to escape from reality, trying to construct or to find an island where they can be on their own, and where they can be virtuous without being disturbed by mankind and by anthropological misery that is connected to the destiny of human beings. But then I think, well, maybe piety should be seen in another way. Piety probably means the depth of analysis leading later on to action. The poet Paul Celan said that being attentive is the mystical prayer of the soul. And I think that is a form of piety, being attentive to what happens, watching to what surrounds you, and if you truly do so, you can't remain just contemplative. Then there is also a call, a vocation for action. So, to sum up, the virtues of Bildung in the German system may come very closely to what Erasmus already wrote in the beginning of the 16th century by putting forward three beautiful yet open notions, being erudition, wisdom, and piety. Now, when I'm talking like that about teaching, you may say, okay, but you are an old man and completely surpassed by reality. And that is true. But on the other hand, I think we have to start with the vision, and then we can come to the technical means giving it shape. For instance, digital possibilities. Some people today say the digital techniques are replacing everything that previously existed. Universities won't be physically present anymore. No buildings needed, no dull professors, as if professors who are not dull are ontologically excluded, no rooms for students, no space lost in the centers of cities, but just a digital world. Young people working in the kitchen of their mother and learning there the mysteries of physics without being disturbed by professors and their annoying stories. Is that true? I don't think so. I think that human contact remains important and that forms of education will be very blended and very different in the future. I think you will still have classes for a large number of students, but they have to be brilliant. Otherwise, everybody is running away, and rightly so. And probably they have to be underpinned by digital techniques. One of those techniques that we are currently working out with a commercial firm in, of course, West Flanders, is the fact that during classes, the professor is standing here, like I am right now, people can ask questions, and the questions asked by most people are coming at the top of the screen. That means that as a professor, you can, of course, answer the questions that are not formally asked, because it is not easy, of course, in a large group to take the floor. I was not able to do so when I was 18 years old in a classroom with 600 students, and many people are rightly a little bit shy. Yet by pushing on buttons and asking the questions, you can have a lively interaction without needing the courage to expose oneself publicly by being too courageous from time to time. But at the same time, techniques are found to improve discussions in classes and in group work, where immediately results of other groups can be brought under the attention of the group working also on similar issues. And of course, you can also imagine virtual classes with screens sitting there instead of people and having lively discussions in the typical Harvard style, with people then only virtually present or at least physically at other places. In other words, I do believe in digital techniques for universities. But first you need a vision and ideas, and then the digital techniques are at the service of those visions. They will never replace vision. That's, I think, the view on teaching. And so I come to my second point, or my second element of the University of the Future, and that's research. And here I will just mention a few elements that seem to be very important to survive as universities. First of all, there is a need of enough, and now I'm also talking about exact sciences and science and technology, enough basic research is needed, not just valorization. I can imagine that in days of economic crisis, some people and politicians are the first to do so, maybe faster direct results, concrete forms of valorization, small companies, startups, and of course, they have their place. They should be stimulated. But you need at the same time also excellent basic research. If not, you are like a soccer team, just buying the stars, sometimes old stars, over the top, and neglecting the youth. Whereas the formation of the youth is of course the future of any credible soccer team. Second element, important is that there is enough starting money for young professors, because old professors are not only old, but at the same time powerful. They know the techniques to obtain research projects. Very often they have balanced and very rich teams. And young professors need some starting money to be in a possibility to be original, new, to oppose a little bit to the previously brilliant ideas of their predecessors. We do that at our university. Every starting professor receives €100,000, not for making a travel over the world, but to start his research and to hire some people. Then I think a third element for research is that we should focus on quality instead of quantity. That means that finally it's important not just to count publications, but to look at their true value intrinsically. We try to do that at our university, but here we are just following the large American universities like Harvard Business School and others. We are going to require from our professors a bio-sketch. What does it mean? New professors, when applying, candidates for becoming a professor, should write on 2 pages, not 20 because that's much easier, on 2 pages who they are. Where are they coming from? What is their current ID on things? And what are their future plans? You write that on 2 pages, meanwhile mentioning the 5 most important realizations of your life until then. Realizations, not necessarily publications. It can also be a startup or an activity you organized internationally or whatever, but something that shows that people are attractive, innovative, can do new things, and are not just followers of the masters of the past. A fourth element is that contract research will become more important with companies, with the government, but it should always be in mutual independence. And for that, some ethical guidelines are necessary. Sometimes people say we should distrust the companies. Well, it's maybe a good idea, but very often governments are worse because they ask for research to certain sociological or political departments, and they are asking in advance also for a required result. So if we have to distrust the companies, let's just, in a kind way of course, distrust everybody, governments included. A fifth element is an ethical conduct for publications. And that's double. It's the relationship between professors and doctoral students or young researchers, but of course the whole story also of plagiarism. People writing and writing, and of course writing what has already been written, and that can be successful because nobody reads those publications anymore. I recently read an article saying that the average scientific publication is read by 1.0 person. I would be very interested to know better the 0.0. That these are the interesting people. But anyway, you see, that's the problem. People write and don't read. In the past, people read a lot before writing. And then, of course, plagiarism and other things are at risk. Another element is the importance of valorization. We should, of course, never underestimate it. Leuven has an LRD section since 1972 already, with 110 startups, creating also 3,500 labor places, 3,500 employees in the region. And for that reason, our university, hospital, and everything surrounded it are by far the largest institutions of the province. And the last and seventh element is interdisciplinarity, but then through one. And there I think that sometimes the interdisciplinary mind should also be present in one person. We are, for instance, for new mandates, quite keen to offer a job to people who have, for instance, studied mathematics and philosophy. It happens from time to time. That combination is sometimes beautiful because you have a horizontal view on things leading to strange connections. After the research matter comes the service to society. Service to society is always a third element that plays a part in university life, and it is important because universities have to be found nice by the population. Why? Well, if they don't like us, they won't give us money. then everything will go to soccer or something like that. So people should have the idea that we are useful, interesting, and friendly people. Even if we are not, at least the perception should be created. But we can do a lot of useful things, I think. And here we should not ask that everybody goes for the same thing. It doesn't mean anything. But let's try to see what people are good at. We have at KU Leuven a very large hospital, among the 3 largest on continental Europe. So the clinical work in that hospital is, of course, a service to society. At the same time, it helps scientific research. At the same time, it is also an aid for teaching. So it's clear here in this case that all those elements come together and that service to society becomes very concrete when clinical work is at stake. It leads also, and that's the proof that it truly works, it leads also to a lot of donations by people to our medical faculty. People are grateful to what happened or for what has not achieved maybe sometimes, but at least there was an attempt. Clinical work is a possibility, valorization, as already mentioned, is a possibility, but also the participation to debate in society. I think that our professors and professors of universities should have the courage to engage into that debate. Sometimes they dislike it a little bit and they say, okay, what happens in life, it's not something we should focus on too much. We are writing our brilliant publications in the meantime. But there is some fear also playing in that attitude, because when you participate in debate in society, then you will be contradicted. People will blame you or criticize you for what you are saying. And professors are not always used to that. Very often they are in a protected situation, they are the masters of their discipline. Everybody admires them or says to do so, including their partners. But then all of a sudden they are launched into the heat of the night, the struggle in society, and it becomes different. So living with criticism is also one of the aspects that we should try to acquire as universities. If we want to really play a part, then criticism will be an element of it. Criticism of society. And we should go for that, because aren't we as universities the key players when it comes to sustainability? Isn't that something we should offer to society much more than others, like politicians, who are of course a little bit in a difficult situation as they are pressed by public opinion, by their voters, by elections coming and going very quickly. Can political leaders, for instance, think longer than 4 or 5 years? Probably yes, but in that case, very often they won't be re-elected. The press is even working on a shorter notice. Rumors are becoming the truth for 2 days and are replaced then by another truth. And there are probably good reasons why society, and that's true in many countries, have more trust in academics than they do have in politicians or journalists or other categories of the population. Because deep in their heart, many people count on us to study, let's say, climate change, but not just politically, but in the long run. Ethical values for Europe in the future, refugees and economic migration, what does it mean truly from all sides? These questions have to be asked by us, by universities. And we should be maybe even more audacious in addressing those themes than we did in the past. But of course, criticism will be our part. I would like to end with a few words on the internal structure of universities. Well, I think we should also, as a university, be a community that can be an example for the rest of the world. Governing universities is not an easy thing, Because when you think that as a rector you are the boss, then in any case you are a bad rector. You are not a boss. How can you be the boss with a range of very strange academics who are all a little bit vain, who believe in what they can do, who take their own ways and directions, who have their hidden but also open ambitions? The only thing that we can do is let them go. They are paving the way. They are making the true connections. And that's also what happens here. We are signing today a memory of understanding and an agreement because for a long time, grassroots contacts were there. And academics are very good at those things. We can sign all kinds of agreements, but the connection between people has to be the right one to develop through ideas. So subsidiarity is very important, and that subsidiarity, of course, is only slightly counterbalanced by the government of a university that tries to work or to look that people all go more or less in a direction which is compatible with each other. The same direction, maybe not, but the sense of community has to be kept alive among people who are tremendously difficult among each others. Lawyers and doctors are very different, but all doctors are also different from each others. And all lawyers, well, they do hate each other, even for professional reasons. They can't do anything else. And we have to be aware of that. A feeling of community among very difficult and very different people at the same time. Another element that we should try to preserve is autonomy against companies, but also against the government. I like governments, and I like them especially when I don't see them too often. They are very welcome, of course, when they are present here at signing ceremonies. And you have seen, for instance, that our Prime Minister is a very decent man and does the things he is actually doing in an excellent way. But what we do not need is a kind of lack of autonomy, people saying us how to do research, what the highlights should be, how education should be organized. And here I think we are coming in many countries, including Flanders, in a situation where that idea of autonomy is not seen anymore by politicians as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of strength and trust. You have to trust people. That's a key notion. You have to trust them as such. Governments have to trust universities, and universities have to trust the people working at universities. Blind trust? No. But controlled trust is also a problem. If, for instance, you are married and you tell to your partner, of course, I trust you fully, you come and go when and where you want, but you can also understand that I have to hire a private detective to check whether that trust is really deeply rooted. It can't go like that. Sometimes we need just a bit more of trust. And the strange thing is that when you give people trust, they become trustful. You can trust them when you give them trust. And that's my last word. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for your inspiring lecture. I have a question. It's supposed that humanities are facing very serious global crisis now. Do you believe in this? And if yes, who's responsible for this? Of course, all, we. but in details, politicians, scientists, mass media, or somebody or something else? Thank you.
Well, I think that the people who are truly responsible for global crisis are always those trying to decline their responsibility. That's the typical starting point. And I think very often the atmosphere in society is what leads to crisis. For instance, look at the 2008 financial crisis with all the American banks being in trouble. Well, ultimately, Europe had more problems with the crisis than the United States, because probably there is a more pervasive mood, a flavor of optimism. So I think the spirit in society is maybe the most important element. You can look at things positively or negatively, and we can help in creating that understanding. I will give one clear example. Some people are saying today that Europe is in crisis, that things are not going well, that we have the financial troubles in some countries, including Greece, that we have the refugee crisis, and indeed the inability of Europe to protect its borders decently right now. That's true. But does it mean necessarily that Europe is in crisis now? It's maybe the first time that we truly are confronted with difficulties. It's easy to believe in Europe when everything is going well, when people are becoming richer, when freedom is celebrated also after the end of the Iron Curtain, etc. Then it's easy to believe in everything. But in dark moments, one has to survive. And you could say that Europe is now maybe proving the value of its existence because it is still there, notwithstanding difficult external elements like the financial crisis and the refugee crisis. At the same time, difficult moments are also a possibility to change techniques and methods. What did we do wrong in the past? How can we improve that? That should be the question for politicians, but also for academics. And maybe it is easier for academics than for politicians to admit the mistakes they made.
Many thanks for a very interesting lecture. I would like one question related to this. Quite often we could listen from our partners from different industries, like demands for universities to develop so-called soft skills, or usually like extracurricular activities, like leadership and other these extracurricular activities afterwards, after graduation, it helps graduates to be quicker at going to the labor market and into the professional career. And my question is, how really university is responsible about these extracurricular activities? Is this institutional responsibility or more just individual for each student?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So those soft skills, it plays certainly a part also for people, for instance, with a very strong technical education, who sometimes miss some human skills, etc. I think there are two ways that can be followed at the same time. One is more institutional, the other one is more individual, as you were also partly suggesting. The institutional one is that, of course, for certain programs, like in our case in Leuven, the industrial engineers, a kind of investigation learned us that those people are technically brilliant, but there it stops. They miss two things: economic insight, which is not unimportant when they are working for companies, and secondly, soft skills, and they are important if they want to go beyond their technical field of competence. And they will have to do so after a while. In case you are a technical engineer, let's say, or an industrial engineer, and you are 25, then you know all the techniques of the day. When you are 50, well, then younger people are better than you are. So if you are not able to be also good in leadership and soft skills, then you will be unemployed after a while if you are not very careful. So here I think that indeed those skills should be also included in the programs so that people are not the prisoners of their beautiful, brilliant, but also limited knowledge. But we can also do other things, and that's more private. Let's now take civil engineers, who have, normally speaking, a higher status than even industrial engineers. Those civil engineers are sometimes really bright, although they can hide it very well from time to time, but they are really bright. Huh? But then, sometimes they miss also certain skills. For instance, in order to be successful in a company, you should be able to write a memorandum of 1 or 2 pages in an attractive language. And those engineers, they will say, but we can do so. We can write a text, and we don't make spelling mistakes, no orthograph problems or anything of that kind, we can do so. That's not always the case. So we offer them the possibility at our university to take classes in creative writing. And that doesn't mean, of course, that they should write poems. A poem written by an engineer is most of the time against human rights, forbidding torture. Let's be honest in that. But they should be able to write a text that is not only correct, but also attractive. And that's something people don't see all the time. A text can be correct, but impossible to read. And we help them to make an attractive text out of it. And that's personal, because if people say, well, I don't need that, it's all rubbish, it's the content of the message that prevails, well, you can't force them to write beautiful texts. But many people, increasingly, are interested in that aspect of their job, which indeed, as you were suggesting, leads in the long run to a better career. Not at the very beginning where the technical competences are prevailing, but in the middle of the career, then the question is, will those people be more or less in the staff, administrators, will they be leaders or not? And then those other competencies, in any case, should be fostered.
I would like to ask the question, which maybe wouldn't get in the first places in your digital system you described in many auditories, but what about religion and university? What about the future of studies in theology and religion? What could be and what should be the purpose of such studies? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for this question. I am at the same time, as announced by my colleague, a secular lawyer with all the diseases and weaknesses that includes, but also a canon lawyer, which may be even worse. But that means that my field of expertise is Roman Catholic canon law also. Now, I think our vision as a university, as a Catholic university on that issue is that we are Catholic and proud of our tradition. That's, by the way, also something we said in Rome to Cardinal Parolin and others. At the same time, we are a university, thus we are thinking freely, and that's necessary. Some people say then, yes, but you should be loyal. Well, one can only be loyal when one is free. But we are convinced of the fact that also sciences like theology have their place in the university, and even an important one. Today, I think the discussion among universities can go into 2 directions. One direction is a scientist way of thinking in the old-fashioned style of the French philosopher Auguste Comte. Everything is merely science. Science will unravel all the mysteries of mankind, and what cannot be scientifically proven with hard statistics is rubbish. That's something you see more and more, certainly in Western Europe, where the fear for Islam leads to a revival of those old secularist ideas. Then there is also a second possibility, and that second possibility is that as a university, of course, we go for true science, but we are also aware of the fact that the conception of life, how people look at life, is equally important and is part of human existence. That means that religious adherence or philosophical conviction should be taken seriously. Moreover, if you want to understand the society as it is today, with all its complex structures and pluriformity, then you have also to go to the heart of human beings, including religion. You can't just study religion from the outside as a set of facts, but you have also to go inside religious experience and then to analyze that, of course, also scientifically. So personally, I think that this second road, which also goes for true religious but also feelings and convictions, will be the way of the future. The idea that no scientific research of theology is possible is of course erroneous, because then you should of course also outrule philosophy, macroeconomy, sociological speculations, etc. We have to admit that the degree of so-called truth differs, but at the same time that difference makes things important and interesting. I think that in the long run, a strictly scientific vision of university will lead to an impoverishment and to finally a non-scientific society as a university, as it does not take into account all elements of human existence, including the aspiration for transcendent thinking and the difficult moments of human life.
You mentioned how academics are more trusted because they basically have this more forward thinking, the forward kind of thinking. But how do we, like the politicians and the press who seem to have this short-term thinking, how do we partake in, explaining to society that we need to do, certain things in regards to the future? Like, how do we participate in society, meanwhile not losing the legitimacy that we have?
That's of course a risk. You're right. You may, as long as you remain hidden, you won't lose your legitimacy because nobody knows how strong or how weak you truly are. But I think that of course we shouldn't, in the debate in society, take sides at all moments. We shouldn't say, for instance, politician A is stupid and politician B is a genius, and then we change sides again after 2 weeks. But we should try to put what politicians, journalists and others say, to bring it in a long-term perspective. So my colleague, Vice Rector Peters, is an expert in social security. Well, he should try to place measures taken today in a sustainable model of the welfare state for the next decades, not for the next 5 years. And you can, of course, study a lot of things. What will be the pension expectations for the coming years? Can we go on with the same employment measures, etc.? And that's a long-term thinking which goes beyond the political choices. They still have to be made, but at least we can tell people what will happen if a certain road is followed. And then you can, of course, also formulate your preferences, because you are not immediately intervening in the political game, but giving a long-time perspective. What I do think personally is that people are waiting for a long-time perspective. They are fearing, for instance, certainly in Western Europe, that the next generation will be a little poorer than the previous one. Not much. It won't be complete poverty, but at least that loss of welfare is making people anxious. They don't want their children to be in a worse position than themselves, etc. And for that, they really are in search of perspectives that go beyond a scope of 3 or 4 years. Are we losing confidence then? I think not, as long as we are balanced in what we are saying. We don't take ourselves also too seriously, and we are open for criticism without shouting ourselves to those who are our critics. But I think indeed that we create more liability from society in case we are courageous enough to express ourselves.
Thank So, to commemorate the visit to our university, you know, we are also doing very different activities. Those activities are evolution of some creatures created by our Faculty of Education, Psychology and Arts. They are doing some play work, ceramics. Yeah, there's of course some brochures about the university and similar also to your and also the medal of our university. Not that old as yours, but less. Thank you for.
Thank you very much. Many thanks.
Paldies visiem par klātbūtni un starp šis ir jauks akts.